During World War II, the United States released Lucky Luciano from prison and deported him to Italy in exchange for mafia assistance during the military campaign to drive the Nazis from the Italian peninsula. Luciano promptly flew to Cuba and set up large-scale illegal operations there that included working with American corporations to control Cuba. On conclusion of the Italian campaign, the Mafia was rewarded with control of the ports and docks in Italy to exclude unions friendly to socialist and communist interests. Heroin smuggling through these ports became the major pipeline to supplying the American and world markets for decades to come, as well as the natural transit point for the rat lines, or the routes of escape that Nazi war criminals use to escape from justice of the military tribunals. Most of these Nazis came to the United States or went to South America, aided by Allen Dulles and the CIA in Operation Paperclip. In China in 1949, the Communists under Mao drove out the U.S.-backed nationalist warlord Chiang Kai-shek, whose defeated army, the Kuomintang, KMT, fled to the area known as the Golden Triangle and took over opium production to finance weapons purchases and the finer things in life. By the 1950s, heroin had become a nationwide concern in the U.S. Senate hearings, popular movies, and criminologists blamed addicts for the soaring crime rates. These KMT operations were hidden from the U.S. public for 20 or 30 years, and it is only recently that Afghanistan has captured 80 to 90% of the world heroin market. In Vietnam, the U.S. began to displace the French by 1954. The French had facilitated the heroin trade to retain the cooperation of the corrupt local Vietnamese elite. The U.S. exploited the Montagnard tribesmen as a source of opium and used the CIA's Air America to bring in guns and supplies in exchange for drugs, while large quantities of heroin appeared in the U.S. Addiction plagued GIs in Vietnam to the point of reducing their fighting capacity, and after the war, these men brought their drug problem home with them. The U.S. government promoted the drug traffic and intervened to make sure that the traffic would not be discovered. In the words of one former investigator, "You'd be running a criminal investigation, say narcotics. You'd find out that Inspector so-and-so of your national police is involved in this. You investigate up to a point and you can't go any further. It would go to our headquarters, and then it would go to Washington, and nothing would ever happen." The intelligence gleaned from these people was more important than stopping the drug traffic. The senior public relations man for the DEA offers the explanation, quote, "Their mission was to get people to fight against the communists, not to stop the drug traffic." Much of the drugs smuggled out on the CIA's Air America operation were smuggled inside the dead bodies of American GIs. The Nugan Hand Bank in Australia was the scene of one of the largest bank frauds in history up to that time in 1980. The investments firm was set up in 1973 by covert intelligence assets from the United States, and the board staffed by prominent U.S. admirals, generals, colonels, and William Colby, former head of the CIA. These men used their prestige to solicit investment by wealthy businessmen in Hong Kong and Australia. The selling point was to evade paying taxes. However, the real practice was a type of pyramid scheme. These millions were never invested, but instead used to purchase weapons and trade them for heroin in the Golden Triangle in order to finance ongoing operations outside of legislative or even executive control of the elected U.S. government. Branches of the banking front were opened on several continents to move weapons, drugs, and money between drug producers, customers, and covert wars in South Africa, Central America, Iran, and other places. Corrupt foreign leaders such as Ferdinand Marcos, as well as drug lords in the Golden Triangle, were actively courted by Nugan Hand participants such as General Leroy J. Maynor, former CEO of the U.S. bases in the Philippines. The Stuart Royal Commission that investigated the billion-dollar fraud functioned largely to cover up the nature and intent of the crime. When this house of cards collapsed, the two owners were allowed time to flee. Michael Hand, the former Green Beret and intelligence asset, formerly of Air America, disappeared, while Frank Nugent was found murdered in what was covered up as a suicide. In 1975, CIA team leader Theodore Shackley issued an ultimatum to the Australian intelligence services that their relationship would end if the Australian Prime Minister continued to question the CIA's influence in Australian internal affairs. 3 days later, the Governor-General, John Kerr, a man with extensive ties to CIA-front organizations such as the Asia Foundation, going back many years, dismissed the elected government and the elected leader, Whitlam, in a constitutional coup.